The monitoring station hummed with its usual quiet efficiency as thousands of data streams flickered across holographic displays in the command center of the Galactic. Council Headquarters Sheetha sat at her console near the back of the vast circular room where the junior communications officers typically worked in relative obscurity, while their superiors made the important decisions that governed the peaceful civilizations of the SHI. She was young for her posting, her blue and silver feathers still bright with youth, and she took her duties seriously, even if those duties mostly involve rooting automated messages and filing reports that no one would read for months. The alert came through on a secondary channel at 0347 station times. Veather's head feathers rose in alarm as she read. The distress signal parameters. Emergency priority. Multiple casualties reported. Hostile force engaged. Immediate military assistance requested. The source was the Velkara system, a peaceful aquatic species that inhabited the Outer Rim territories where council protection was more theoretical. Then actual Shay quickly routed the signal to her supervisor and watched as it climbed the chain of command, each official adding their timestamp and notes as the bureaucratic process ground forward with its characteristic slowness within an hour. The council chamber itself was in session, though calling it a session was generous, since most representatives attended via hologram rather than making the journey in person for what they clearly considered a minor frontier incident. Counselor Vexter of the Zelnari Collective spoke first, his translator rendering his clicking speech into smooth galactic standard. The Valkara system lies beyond our standard patrol routes, and the cost of mounting a rescue operation would be substantial. We have protocols, added Counselor Mingara, her serpentine form coiled in her delegation pod as she gestured with one delicate hand toward the holographic display showing the Velkara system. The frontier worlds understand the risks of settling in unprotected space, and we cannot be expected to rush military forces across half the galaxy every time someone encounters difficulty. Zithara listened from her station, where the feed played on her secondary monitor, and felt her crop tighten with something she couldn't quite name but suspected. Was shame the Velkara were dying, and the council was discussing budget allocations. Shay turned back to her console to file the appropriate paperwork for what would likely become a rescue mission in 8 months after proper committee reviews. When something caught her attention, the distress signal had been broadcast on an open emergency frequency, and her system showed that it had been picked up by multiple receivers across that section of space, including several automated relay stations. Of those relay stations had forwarded the signal according to some protocol Zithara didn't recognize. She traced the forwarding path and felt her heart skip a beat when she saw the destination. The Sol System Earth, a human homeworld, the quarantine. The world whose inhabitants had been politely but firmly asked to stay in their own star system after their first contact with the Galactic Council had revealed them to be absolutely terrifying in ways that still gave xenobiologists nightmares. Humans came from a death world where the gravity was crushing. The atmosphere was corrosive with oxygen. The fauna included pack hunters that could run down prey over days of pursuit. And the flora had evolved toxins and defensive mechanisms that would make a chemical weapons expert weep with admiration. Humans themselves were persistence predators with binocular vision designed for tracking prey, redundant organs that let them keep fighting through injuries that would kill most species, and a psychological profile that combined pack bonding instincts with an inexplicable refusal to accept defeat even in hopeless situations. The Council had been. It's unsettled by humanity. It's hostile. Exactly, but very, very careful. The quarantine was presented as a mutual protection agreement, while humanity adjusted to galactic civilization. But everyone knew it was because the other species were frankly afraid of what these Deathworlders might do if they were allowed to roam. Freely Sithra stared at her console and wondered if she should report this. Routing was probably just an automated glitch. Some old protocol from the initial contact period that had never been properly deleted from the relay station's memory banks. Humans couldn't respond to the distress call, even if they wanted to, because their faster-than-light technology was limited, and their ships were designed for in-system defense. Not long-range deployment. She almost convinced herself to ignore it then. She thought about the Velkara dying while the Council debated committee procedures, and she opened a priority channel to the Council chamber honored counselors. she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness at interrupting the discussion. I need to report an anomaly in the distress signal routing. The debate paused and several holographic heads turned toward the communications section where Zithara sat. Velcora distress call was automatically forwarded to the Sol system. She continued quickly before she lost her nerve. The human homeworld received the signal approximately 47 minutes ago. There was a moment of silence, then Counselor Vexer made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. The humans are confined to their system by treaty, and even if they weren't, their technology is generations behind our own. They have no fleet capable of responding to frontier emergencies, and frankly, doubt they would even understand the urgency given their limited exposure to interstellar protocols. We should log the routing error and move on to substantive discussion. Mingara added with a dismissive wave. The council returned to its debate about whether to form a subcommittee to investigate. Forming a committee to review the possibility of mounting an eventual rescue operations, Thera returned to her console and tried to focus on her regular duties, but she kept glancing at the system monitor that tracked ship movements in and out of known space. 3 hours passed, then 6. The council adjourned for a rest period with nothing decided except that they would reconvene in 2 days to continue discussions if Thor was preparing to end her shift. When every proximity alarm in the monitoring station went off simultaneously, her console lit up like a festival display as massive energy signatures appeared. At the edge of monitored space near the Velcora system knot, the Kreth swarm, expanding their assault. Something else, something coming in fast, from the direction of Sol. Multiple FTL signatures detected. The senior officer called out from the command platform as the entire monitoring station scrambled. 2 stations, configuration unknown. Energy signatures consistent with military-grade fusion drives. Count. As he paused and his voice rose in disbelief, count as 57 vessels, and they're headed directly for Velcora space at maximum. Burn. Zithara pulled up the sensor data and felt her feathers flatten against her skull in instinctive fear response. The ships were angular and brutal-looking, nothing like the smooth, organic curves of council vessels, and they bristled with what could only be weapons arrays. So many weapons the energy signatures matched the limited data the council had on human ship design. Get me the council chamber, the senior officer demanded. Wake up every member if you have to, and tell them the humans are responding to that distress call. Zithara sent the priority alert and watched the sensor display as 57 human warships burned toward the Velcora system at speeds that shouldn't be possible for vessels that size. The Deathworlders had received the SOS and they were coming. Council had taken 3 hours to begin discussing whether to help. The humans had taken 3 hours to launch a fleet somewhere. In the back of her mind, Zithara realized that the galaxy was about to change in ways none of them were prepared for. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the TCFS Indomitable and watched the Velcora system grow larger in the tactical display as her fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a coordinated emergence that would have been impossible for most species to execute. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, each officer calling out status reports while the ship's artificial intelligence processed millions of data points per second to build a complete picture of the battlefield they were about to enter. Tactical. Give me a situation report, Elena ordered, her hands clasped behind her back in a stance that projected more calm than she felt. This was humanity's first major military operation beyond the Sol system, and everyone knew they were probably violating about 40 different interstellar treaties. Just by being here, Lieutenant Chen studied his console, and his expression grew grim.
Multiple
hostile contacts engaged with Velcora defensive platforms. Ma'am, profile matches the Kreth swarm from the intelligence briefings, and they're using overwhelming numbers to simply absorb the defender's fire while closing to boarding range. Velcora vessels are not designed for combat, he continued, highlighting several icons on the shared tactical display. They're barely managing to slow the swarm down, and their defensive stations are failing. One by one, Elena nodded and opened a channel to the fleet. All vessels, this is Indomitable Actual. We didn't come all this way to watch people die, so we're going weapons free the moment we're in range, and I want strike packages Alpha through Delta to execute immediately upon my mark. The acknowledgments came back from 56 other ships ranging from proper military destroyers to armed freighters. whose crews had volunteered the moment they heard about the distress call that was humanity in a nutshell. Alina thought, tell them someone needs help and they'll grab whatever they can use as a weapon and rush toward the danger instead of away from it comes. Broadcast on all frequencies in Galactic Standard, she ordered, keep it simple. We received your distress call, and we're here to help. The communications officer nodded and sent the message while Alina turned her attention back to the tactical situation. The Kreth swarm had noticed the human fleet and approximately 30 of their bioships were breaking off from the main assault to intercept what they probably thought would be easy prey. They were about to learn why human military doctrine had made the Galactic Council so nervous during first contact weapons-free. Alina commanded fire. The Indomitable's railguns spoke first, accelerating tungsten penetrators to a significant fraction of light speed and sending them downrange toward the approaching Kreth vessels. The bioships had thick organic armor designed to absorb energy weapons, which was the standard armament for most Council species who viewed kinetic weapons as crude and inefficient. Kreth had never encountered a species that still used what amounted to throwing rocks very, very fast. The first penetrator punched through a bioship's forward carapace and continued through 3 internal compartments before exploding out the rear in a spray of frozen organic matter. 5 more Kreth ships died in the first salvo. Then the rest of the fleet opened fire and space filled with missiles, railgun rounds, and directed energy weapons that the humans had specifically designed to have multiple damage profiles because Earth's military history had taught them that relying on a single weapon type was a quick path to defeat. The Kreth swarm tried to adapt, splitting their formation and attempting to use their numbers to flank the human fleet. But Alina had grown up studying military history from a planet where warfare was practically a cultural institution. Strike packages Alpha and Bravo. Execute pincer maneuver 7. She ordered Charlie and Delta, hold position and prepare to intercept any swarm elements that break through. The human ships moved with aggressive precision. 2 groups of destroyers accelerating hard to bracket the Kreth formation while the heavier cruisers maintained a firing position that created overlapping fields of fire. With simple geometry married to overwhelming violence, and the Kreth found themselves caught in a crossfire that shredded their organic hulls faster than they could regenerate. The bridge? Lieutenant Chen suddenly called out, "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission from one of the Valkyra ships, audio only, and the translator is struggling with their language." "But I think they're asking who we are." Alina smiled slightly. "Tell them we're the Terran Colonial Fleet, and we're here to help. Also tell them to pull their surviving ships back to a safe distance because things are about to get messy." The battle devolved into a close-range brawl as the Kreth swarm realized they were losing and committed everything to a desperate assault on the human fleet. This was where humanity's evolution on a death world became most apparent. While Council species had evolved in relatively peaceful environments where cooperation and communication were survival traits, humans had evolved in an environment where everything was trying to kill them, and the only way to survive was to be better at killing than anything else. The swarm bioships closed to boarding range, expecting to overwhelm the human vessels with their warrior organisms as they had done to countless other species. What they found instead were ships designed with internal defenses, crew trained in close-quarters combat, Marines in powered armor, who had trained for exactly this scenario. Alina watched the tactical feed as the Kreth boarding pods attached to the outer hull of the destroyer, relentless, and began burning through. The armor plating the feed switched to internal cameras and showed the breach point, where a squad of Marines waited in cover positions. Weapons trained on the glowing circle of metal that was about to fail. The breach opened, and Kreth warriors poured through, each one a nightmare of organic blades and acid-spitting organs. The Marines opened fire with automatic weapons that turned the breach point into a killing zone. To Marines went down in the first exchange, but the rest held position and maintained fire discipline, shooting in controlled bursts that dropped the Kreth warriors faster than they could advance boarding action, repelled on relentless. Chen reported casualties are 2 wounded. Non-fatal Kreth losses are estimated at 37 warriors eliminated. Similar reports came in from other ships as the swarm learned that boarding a human vessel was a quick way to lose warriors without gaining any advantage. The tide of battle shifted decisively in humanity's favor. The Kreth swarm Faced with an enemy that refused to die easily and fought with a ferocity that matched their own, did something that surprised Alina. They retreated not a disorganized rout, but a calculated withdrawal as the surviving bioships broke contact and fled toward the outer system. Hold position, Alina ordered. Overriding the impulse to pursue, let them go and focus on securing the Valkara stations. She opened a channel to the fleet. Damage reports and casualty counts to my console. Immediately medical teams prepared to receive wounded and engineering crews, assess what the Valkyra need for immediate repairs. The reports came in over the next hour and painted a sobering picture. 7 human ships had taken significant damage. Casualties totaled 43 wounded and 12 dead. And the transport vessel Mercy's run had suffered a catastrophic hit to its main drive that left it dead in space. Alina was preparing to order rescue operations when something unexpected happened in the communications display. A video feed appeared showing a Valkara for the first time. An aquatic being that looked something like Earth's seahorses crossed with an octopus. Floating in a tank of water aboard what appeared to be their flagship the translator worked for. Several seconds before rendering their speech, you came. The council discussed and debated, but you came and you fought for us without hesitation. I am Senator Maravis of the Valkar Assembly, and I must know why. Lena thought about all the complicated political and strategic answers she could give, then decided on the truth. Because you sent a distress call, and because we could help. That's what we do. Maravis was silent for a moment, her tentacles moving in patterns that the translator couldn't interpret. Then she said, "Your vessel is damaged, and I see your people working to save it. Our repair ships are coming to assist. It is the least we can do." Alina watched as Valkyra engineering vessels approached the crippled Mercy's run and felt something warm in her chest. Maybe humanity's reputation as dangerous Deathworlders would change. Maybe they could be known for something other than coming from a world that wanted to kill them. Maybe they could be known for showing up when others needed help on the tactical display. The Kreth swarm continued to retreat into deep space, and Alina knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy had just learned that when Deathworlders received a distress call, they didn't debate or form committees, they sent a fleet. The Galactic Council arrived at the Valkara system 6 days after the battle ended, and what they found was not at all what they expected. Council ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in tight formation, their smooth hulls gleaming with the badges of diplomatic authority, and immediately began broadcasting demands for the human fleet to stand down and submit to Council jurisdiction for violating the Sol Quarantine Treaty. Response came from Captain Vasquez aboard the indomitable Council vessels. "This is Captain Alina Vasquez of the Terran Colonial Fleet. We are currently engaged in humanitarian assistance operations at the request of the Valkyra government, and we'll be happy to discuss our actions once we've ensured these people are safe. If you'd like to help, we can use medical supplies and engineering support." The senior council officials were not accustomed to being told to wait. Councillor Vexter demanded an immediate meeting aboard the council flagship and made it clear that this was not a request, but a command backed by the authority of civilizations that had been traveling the stars while humans were still living in caves. Alina agreed to the meeting but insisted on bringing Ambassador Chen Wei, who had arrived on a faster diplomatic ship 2 days ago and had been helping coordinate the relief efforts. Council chamber aboard the flagship was designed to intimidate. A circular room with representatives from dozens of species arrayed in elevated platforms around a central speaking area where petitioners were expected to stand and justify themselves. Lena and Ambassador Chen stood in that central area while holographic displays showed footage of the recent battle and lists of treaty violations scrolled past like accusations. The quarantine agreement was clear. Vexter began, his clicking speech rendered harsh by the translator. Humanity was to remain in the Sol system until such time as the Council determined. You were ready to join galactic civilization instead. You have deployed a military fleet across half the galaxy, engaged in combat operations without authorization, and interfered in matters that are the Council's jurisdiction. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, and his voice was calm but firm. The treaty you reference specifies that human vessels may not leave Sol system space for purposes of colonization, trade, or general travel. Article 7. Section 3 specifically states these restrictions, however. Nowhere in the treaty does it prohibit humanitarian response to distress calls. In fact, the treaty is completely silent on the matter of emergency response. He gestured to the displays showing the timeline of events. The Velkara distress call was received by your monitoring station at 0347. Standard time by 0900. You had formed a committee to discuss forming a committee to possibly consider mounting an eventual rescue operation. Meanwhile, the Velkara were dying. Terran colonial fleet launched a response within 3 hours of receiving the forwarded distress signal, and arrived while the Velkara still had defensive positions intact. Our laws require us to respond to distress calls, and we found nothing in your treaty that prohibited us from doing so. Counselor Mingra uncoiled slightly, and her voice dripped with disdain. You split legal hairs while deploying warships? The Council maintains galactic peace through careful deliberation and diplomatic process, not through rushed military action. Your behavior is exactly why humanity was quarantined in the first place. Alina had been quiet up to this point, but something in Mingara's tone made her temper flare. Careful deliberation? The Velkara sent a distress call, and you spent 3 hours discussing whether it was worth responding while you deliberated? People died, we may be from a death world, but at least we understand that when someone calls for help, you go help them. You don't form a committee to study whether helping might be politically inconvenient. The chamber erupted in multiple languages as various council members tried to speak over each other. Some demanded humanity's immediate withdrawal. Others questioned whether the quarantine was serving its intended purpose. And a few seemed uncertain about what to do with these aggressive Deathworlders, who had just demonstrated both military capability and a willingness to use it. The argument might have continued indefinitely. If Senator Miravos hadn't entered the chamber, the Velkara senator was in a mobile water tank that allowed her to move through air-breathing environments, and her tentacles moved in agitated patterns as she positioned herself near the speaking area. Honored Council, she began, her translated voice carrying clearly through the chamber. I must speak on behalf of my people regarding these events. Vexler looked irritated at the interruption. Senator, we are discussing the humans' treaty violations. Your testimony can be recorded and reviewed by the appropriate committee. No, Miravos said flatly, you will hear this now, because this concerns my people directly, and we have a right to speak. She gestured toward Alina and Chen. These humans came when we called for help. They came not in 6 days or 6 months, but in 3 hours. They fought for us without hesitation, without asking for payment, without demanding treaties or concessions. They bled for us. 12 of their people died, protecting my world, and 43 more were wounded. She turned to face the council representatives. And what did you do? You formed committees, you debated protocols, discussed budgets. While my people died, the chamber fell silent. The humans have spent the past week helping us rebuild. Miravos continued, their medical teams are treating our wounded, using techniques they invented on the spot, because our biologies are completely different. Their engineers are helping repair our defensive stations and teaching us how to better protect ourselves. They refuse to leave until they're certain we're safe. She paused and her tentacles stilled. The council calls them dangerous Deathworlders, and perhaps you're right, but they're dangerous to our enemies. Not to us. They're the first species in my long life who responded to our distress with action instead of paperwork. A new voice entered the discussion from one of the platforms, young Zathara, the communications officer who had first noticed the human response. If I may speak. Honored Council, she said, her feathers ruffling with nervousness, have been monitoring communications traffic throughout the frontier regions, and there are 17 more distress calls awaiting council response. Some have been waiting for months. The frontier is under constant threat from pirates, the Kreth Swarm, and various hostile forces. Our protocols are not designed for rapid response, and our military forces are concentrated in the core systems protecting council worlds. She pulled up a star chart showing the outer rim. These frontier colonies know they're on their own. They accept the risk because the council tells them protection would be too expensive or too complicated. But now they know someone will answer their calls, someone will come help them, and that someone is humanity. The implications hung in the air like a storm about to break. If the Council punished humanity for this rescue, they would be publicly admitting that bureaucratic procedure was more important than saving lives. But if they didn't punish humanity, they would be tacitly admitting that their own systems were inadequate. If Exer tried to regain control of the meeting, the Council will take all testimony under advisement and convene a full session to determine
an appropriate response. In the meantime,
the human fleet will remain in this system and refrain from any further unauthorized operations before anyone could respond. An alert chimed through the chamber. A new distress call had arrived from a mining colony in the Tarsus sector. Hostile raiders attacking, casualties mounting. Immediate assistance required. Lena looked at Ambassador Chen and saw the same calculation in his eyes. They could obey the Council and let those miners die while waiting for authorization, or they could do what humans did. Bestchun gave the slightest nod. Alina tapped her communicator. Indomitable. This is Vasquez. Prepare the fleet for emergency departure. We have a new distress call. Vexer's translator made a sound like choking. Captain, you cannot simply leave this meeting to watch us, Alina said. Simply she turned to Maravas and nodded respectfully. Senator, thank you for speaking on our behalf. If the Council needs to find us, we'll be wherever someone needs help. Ambassador Chen addressed the Council one final time. You can debate treaties and protocols all you want. Meanwhile, we'll be doing what's right when you decide whether that violates your laws. Send us a message. We'll be busy. The two humans left the chamber, and within an hour, the human fleet departed for the Tarsus sector at maximum burn behind them. The Galactic Council descended into chaos as factions formed and debates raged about what to do with these impossible Deathworlders who had somehow turned responding to distress calls into an act of rebellion. And across the frontier, colonies began to hope that maybe, just maybe, they weren't alone anymore. 3 months after the Velcara rescue, the human fleet had become something between a legend and a ghost story across the frontier regions of known. Space Captain Alina Vasquez sat in her ready room aboard the Indomitable, reviewing casualty reports and feeling the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders like physical force. The numbers were stark: 47 dead across the fleet, 236 wounded, and 3 ships damaged badly enough that they'd been sent back to Seoul for repairs they couldn't perform in the field. The fleet that had started with 57 vessels now numbered 41, and those remaining ships were running on spare parts, improvised repairs, and the sheer stubborn determination of their crews to keep fighting. They'd responded to 23 distress calls in 3 months and won every engagement. But the victories were getting harder, and the costs were climbing. Elena pulled up the tactical map showing their current patrol route and the highlighted systems that represented known threats. Kreth. Swarm activity here. Pirates operating from that nebula. Raiders hitting mining operations in that cluster. Was too much territory for too few ships, sir. Communicator chimed and Lieutenant Chen's voice came through. Captain, you're going to want to see this. We just received a data packet from Earth, and the contents are marked urgent from Colonial Command. Alina made her way to the bridge where the main display showed a recorded message from Admiral Torres, the commander of Earth's entire military fleet. The Admiral's expression was grave. Captain Vasquez, I want to start by saying that everyone at home is incredibly proud of what you and the fleet have accomplished. You've saved thousands of lives, and you've shown the galaxy what humanity stands for. He paused, and the gravity in his expression deepened. However, we need to discuss the sustainability of your current operations. The colonial fleet was designed for system defense. It's not extended deployment across multiple sectors. Your supply lines are stretched thin. Your ships are operating beyond their maintenance schedules, and your casualties are mounting. Command is concerned that if you continue at this pace, we're going to lose entire crews to exhaustion, even if the enemy never fires. A shot. The Admiral leaned forward. The Council has been putting pressure on Earth to recall the fleet. The political situation is complicated because half the Council wants you gone, and the other half is quietly funding your operations through back channels. We're running out of resources to support you. And Earth's government is debating whether we can afford to keep this up. I need you to consider a strategic withdrawal to soul space for refit and reassessment. This isn't an order because frankly I don't have the authority to order you to abandon people who need help, but it is a strong recommendation from someone who doesn't want to write letters to the families of an entire fleet." The message ended, and Alina stood quietly for a moment while the bridge crew pretended not to watch. Lieutenant Chen spoke carefully. "Admiral Torres makes good points. Ma'am, we're running on fumes and hope at this point a strategic withdrawal would give us time to repair, refit, and maybe bring in reinforcements." Alina nodded slowly. "Get me Ambassador Chen. I want his read on the political situation, the ambassadors." Face appeared on a smaller display, and he looked as tired as Alina felt. "Captain, I assume you've seen the Admiral's message." "I have," Alina confirmed. "What's your assessment?" Chen sighed. "The frontier colonies are starting to depend on us if we pull back now. We'll be abandoning them, and the Council's slow response times mean a lot of those colonies will fall before official help arrives on the other hand. If we don't pull back, we're going to burn out this fleet, and then there won't be anyone to respond to distress calls. It's a terrible choice," before Alina could respond. The tactical officer called out, "Captain, we're receiving multiple transmissions, text only. Coming from at least a dozen different systems, they're all marked urgent." Alina felt her stomach sink. "Put them on screen." The main display filled with messages, and Elena's eyes scanned through them. "Quickly mining colony requesting escort through. Pirate Territory Research Station reporting Kreth Swarm scouts in their system frontier settlement, asking for help training their militia transport. Convoy requesting protection." It went on, and Alina realized with sick certainty that this was the new reality. The frontier colonies had learned that humans would come if they called.
Ow.
So now they were calling. How do we respond to all of this? Lieutenant Chen asked quietly. "We can't be in a dozen places at once." Alina was about to answer when a new alert chimed, and the tactical officer's voice rose in alarm. "Ma'am, we have a situation. I'm picking up distress signals from 3 different systems, and they're all reporting active combat operations. Profile matches Kreth Swarm assault formations." The bridge fell silent as everyone processed what that meant. The Kreth Swarm didn't typically coordinate attacks across multiple systems unless they were launching a major offensive campaign. Ina pulled up the tactical data and saw the pattern. Immediately, the 3 systems formed a triangle with the human fleet's current position right in the center. "It's a trap," she said quietly. "They learned our response patterns, and now they're using distress calls as bait. If we split the fleet to respond, they'll hit us piecemeal. If we concentrate to hit one system, the other 2 fall." Chen studied the display. "Even if we somehow managed to respond to all 3, we'd be spreading ourselves so thin that we couldn't effectively defend any of them, and our ships are already running on empty." Lena thought about Admiral Torres's message and the political pressure mounting on Earth. She thought about the 47 names on her casualty list, and the families who would never see those people again. She thought about the hundreds of messages from frontier colonies who had started to hope that someone cared about their survival. Then she thought about what would happen if the human fleet pulled back. Those colonies would realize they were on their own again, and this time, they'd know that even the Deathworlders who'd promised to help had limits. The Kreth Swarm would learn that humans could be baited and trapped, and every hostile force in the frontier would understand that humanity's reach exceeded its grasp. "Tactical, get me detailed scans of all 3 target systems," she ordered. "I want to know enemy force composition, defensive assets, civilian populations, and anything else that might affect our response. Comes. Send a priority message to all ships. Prepare for combat operations, and coordinate with engineering to squeeze every bit of performance out of our drives that won't actually cause them to explode." Lieutenant Chen looked at her with concern. "Captain, we can't win this fight not split across 3 systems with our current resources. If we commit to this, we're likely to lose ships, and we might lose the entire fleet." Alina met his eyes. "I know, but if we don't try, those colonies die, and every frontier settlement learns that humanity's promise to help was conditional. We lose credibility, and we lose any chance of building the coalition we need to actually protect the frontier." She pulled up the communication channel to the fleet vessels. "This is Captain Vasquez. You've all seen the tactical situation, and you know what we're facing. This is beyond our capabilities, and we're walking into a trap. But there are 3 colonies out there with people who sent distress calls because They believed we would come. I won't order anyone into this fight if any ship wants to break off and head back to Seoul. I will not hold it against them. You've already done more than anyone had a right to ask." She paused and chose her next words carefully. "But if you're willing to keep fighting, we're going to split into 3 task forces and hit all 3 systems simultaneously. We're going to be outnumbered, outgunned, and probably out of our minds. We're also going to show the Kreth Swarm and everyone else watching that humanity doesn't abandon people just because the odds are bad." The responses came back within minutes. Not a single ship requested permission to withdraw. Instead, the captains sent messages that ranged from simple acknowledgments to much more colorful statements about what the Kreth Swarm could do with their Trapolina. Felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "All right," she said to her bridge crew. "Let's organize this mess into something resembling a battle plan. And someone get me coffee because we're going to be pulling miracles out of thin air, and I want to be awake to appreciate them." As the fleet split into 3 task forces and prepared to jump to faster than light, Alina knew they were probably making a terrible mistake, but it was the kind of mistake that humanity had been making since their ancestors first decided to hunt animals bigger than themselves. Sometimes you had to be a little bit crazy to survive. On a death world, sometimes you had to commit to impossible fights, because the alternative was accepting that might made right. And sometimes you had to show the galaxy that Deathworlders didn't run from traps, they sprang them. The Battle of Proxima Anchorage would be studied in military academies for generations afterward. Though at the time it felt less like a battle and more like organized chaos held together by desperation and stubborn human refusal to accept defeat. Alina Vasquez commanded Task Force Alpha, consisting of 13 ships, including the Indomitable. And they emerged from faster-than-light travel into a nightmare scenario. It somehow managed to be worse than their worst projections. Kreth Swarm had committed nearly 100 bioships to the assault on the human forward operating base at Proxima Anchorage, which meant they'd pulled forces from the other 2 target systems to create an overwhelming concentration of firepower aimed at humanity's main logistics hub. Alina realized immediately that this was the real objective. The Swarm didn't care about the frontier colonies. They wanted to cripple humanity's ability to operate in this region by destroying the supply depot and repair facilities that kept the fleet functional. All ships. Combat Formation Delta, she ordered as tactical displays lit up with hostile contacts. Focus. Fire on the bioships closest to the station and try to create a defensive perimeter. We need to buy time for evacuation. The Indomitable's railguns opened fire, and the familiar thunder of accelerated metal filled the ship as tungsten penetrators reached out across the void to punch through organic armor around them. The rest of Task Force Alpha added their firepower to the defensive effort. But it was immediately clear that 13 ships could not hold back 100 on the station. Commander Sarah Park coordinated the evacuation with the kind of calm efficiency that came from years of military training and absolute certainty that she was about to die. All non-essential personnel to the evacuation ships. She ordered over the station-wide channel. "Essential personnel, maintain your posts until relieved. We're going to hold this station as long as physically possible, and then 30 seconds longer, the Kreth." Bioships broke through the outer defensive line and began attaching to the station's hull, their organic boring mechanisms chewing through metal and composite armor to reach the soft human. Crew inside Park grabbed a rifle from the weapons locker and joined the Marine detachment setting up defensive positions in Corridor 7 Beta, where the first breach was expected. "Remember your training," she told the nervous-looking civilians, who had grabbed weapons when they realized evacuation wasn't going to happen fast enough. "Controlled bursts. Fall back to secondary positions when I give the order, and don't be heroes. We just need to buy the fleet enough time to get people off this station." The breach came with a spray of molten metal, and Kreth warriors poured through the opening. Park opened fire, and the corridor became a killing zone of tracer rounds and screaming aliens back. On the Indomitable's bridge, Alina watched the tactical situation deteriorate with the sick certainty that they were losing. 2 ships had already taken critical damage, and the rest were running low on ammunition. The evacuation shuttles were away, but the station itself was being overrun, and there was no way to save everyone. She was composing the order to retreat when Lieutenant Chen suddenly called out, "Captain, I'm picking up massive FTL signatures. Multiple contacts emerging at the edge of the system, configuration unknown, but count as... His voice rose in disbelief. Over 200 vessels, and they're heading our way at maximum burn. Elena's heart sank because 200 more Kreth ships would turn this defeat into a massacre. Then, the sensor data resolved, and she saw something that made her question whether exhaustion had finally broken her mind. New arrivals weren't Krethi-led ships. Were Velcro combat vessels. Their hulls retrofitted with human weapon systems that they'd clearly installed with more enthusiasm than expertise. Judging by the asymmetric placement of the railgun mounts behind them, came ships from a dozen other frontier species. The avian Concordat's ceremonial honor guard that hadn't seen combat in 3 centuries. Mining ships from the Tarsus colony with improvised armor welded to their hulls. Even some battered freighters whose crews had apparently decided that having guns was better than having cargo space captain. We're receiving a transmission, the communications officer reported multiple languages. I'm trying to sort out the translation, wait. I've got it, the bridge speakers crackled and then carried a message in heavily accented. Galactic Standard with multiple voices overlapping. Human fleet. This is Coalition Rescue Force we received. Your distress signal? We are here to help. Elena felt something break inside her chest and realized with surprise that it was relief so overwhelming it felt like pain. All ships. Coordinate with the incoming coalition forces, she ordered. Her voice rougher than she intended. Let's show these new friends how Deathworlders fight. The battle transformed in moments as 200 fresh ships slammed into the Kreth swarms. Flank with all the coordination of a bar fight, and all the enthusiasm of people who had finally decided to fight back against the threats that had terrorized the frontier for too long. The Valkyra ships fired their new railguns with wild abandon, often missing their targets but occasionally landing hits that punched through. Kreth armor in spectacular fashion, the Avian Honor Guard flew their antique vessels with pride and precision, using formations designed for ceremonial flyovers too. Execute attack runs that confuse the swarm's tactical predictions. The mining ships from Tarsus demonstrated that people who spent their lives working in hostile environments knew how to improvise, adapt, and generally refuse to die, even when it would be more convenient. It was chaotic and messy and absolutely glorious. The Kreth swarm, which had adapted to human tactics over months of engagement, had no framework for dealing with dozens of species using human tactics in completely different ways there. Bioships tried to fall back and regroup, but the coalition forces pursued with the kind of aggressive enthusiasm that suggested they'd been waiting years for permission to fight back on. The station. Commander Park heard the change in the battle's rhythm through the whole transmitted sounds of weapons. Fire, and realized with shock that reinforcements had arrived. All personnel. The cavalry is here, she announced over the "Come hold your positions, and make these bugs regret ever boarding a human station." The Kreth warriors in Corridor 7 Beta suddenly found themselves facing not a defeated enemy preparing to retreat, but a group of humans who had decided that actually they were going to win this fight after all. Park led the counterattack personally, and 3 corridors later, they'd retaken the breach point and sealed it with emergency bulkheads across the station. Similar scenes played out as the human defenders rallied and drove the boarders back into Spacian orbit. The Kreth swarm made one final attempt to turn the battle by concentrating their remaining forces on the Indomitable in a desperate bid to kill the human. Commander Lena watched them come and opened a channel to the coalition ships. All vessels. This is Captain Vasquez. They're coming for my ship, and I need you to show them why that was a mistake. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Veluk ships positioned themselves between the Indomitable and the swarm, taking hits meant for the human flagship Havian. Fighters conducted strafing runs that harassed the bioships and disrupted their formation mining. Vessels used their industrial cutting lasers at point-blank range, trading armor for effect tan through it all. The human ships fought with the desperate skill of people who had been at war since before their species invented. Riding the Kreth swarm broke it wasn't a fighting retreat or a tactical withdrawal. Was a rout as the surviving bioships fled toward the outer system in complete disarray. pursued by coalition vessels whose crews had discovered the intoxicating joy of winning Elena. Let them go because she'd learned that lesson from experience. Sometimes it was better to let a beaten enemy run rather than corner them into a final desperate fight all ships. Stand down from combat status. She ordered begin damage assessment and rescue operations. And someone please get me a channel to whoever is commanding that coalition fleet. The face that appeared on her screen was familiar. Senator Maravas of the Velkara. Her tentacles moving in patterns that the translator rendered as satisfaction, Captain Vasquez. She said warmly, "I hope you don't mind that we used your tactics." Alina laughed and it came out slightly hysterical. "Senator, you can use whatever tactics you want when you're saving our lives. How did you even organize this?" Maravas' expression became serious. "After the Council tried to confine your fleet, we realized that the frontier colonies needed to take responsibility for our own defense. We formed what some are calling the Frontier Coalition. Independent systems working together for mutual protection when we heard you were facing a Kreth trap. We mobilized everything we had. Another face joined the transmission, young Zithara, the avian communications officer, now apparently flying one of the honor guard vessels we've been organizing in secret for weeks. She explained, her feathers ruffled with excitement. Every species you've helped has been retrofitting ships, training crews, and preparing to support your operations. You showed us that we didn't have to wait for the Council to protect us. We could protect ourselves." A third figure appeared, Ambassador Chen, and he looked simultaneously exhausted and energized.